guys, welcome back to another video. Today we're having a conversation about a series that you wrote on a couple of months ago about the slippery slope mentality.
Yes, slippery slope thinking in the church. I'm really eager to know what you think about it.
I think it'll be a fun conversation.
It will be.
And we're just applying it to the church because one of the things in Connect 3 Ministries that we care about is healthy churches. So we're just applying this conversation to the church.
Right, very good.
So before we get into some of the questions that we really want to talk about, give us a quick rundown of what your blog post contained.
We probably ought to begin by defining the slippery slope argument. The slippery slope argument is that we should disapprove or disallow certain decisions or actions based on what they might lead to. And in the church, I gave an illustration that we might not want our preachers to go without coat and tie because of what it might lead to. It might lead to more casual dress in the church. Some people might appreciate that illustration, and to others it might not make any sense at all.
Yeah.
But that's the idea, that
Right.
if we make a certain decision or we approve of a certain action, it could lead to something that we really don't want to happen.
Okay.
Now, what I think we ought to add here is that that's a logical fallacy.
What do you mean by that?
Slippery slope thinking is a logical fallacy, according to all the philosophical textbooks, the philosophy textbooks. It's not necessarily true that event A will lead to event F.
Gotcha.
It's not necessarily true that if we allow our preachers to go without a coat and tie, soon they'll be preaching in shorts and flip-flops. That's not necessarily true.
Right.
But we did acknowledge that there is some legitimacy to the slippery slope argument because sometimes decisions can lead to unintended consequences, especially when you're talking about certain groups of people.
Gotcha.
We also talked about some of the disadvantages of applying slippery slope thinking in the church. We said that it might lead us to make human laws and human rules in religion. And that's a dangerous thing to do according to the scriptures, right? We don't want man-made religion. Jesus was opposed to human rules and human laws in religion. Why? Because they tend to abuse people and make religion onerous and burdensome. They tend to limit our freedom in Christ. And so those are just a few of the disadvantages that we discussed. What we want to do in the rest of this vlog is to ask certain questions related to the slippery slope argument. We'd like to hear what you think about these questions, but I'm really eager to hear what Susanna thinks about these questions.
I don't know why.
So here's the first. Well, I'll tell you why. It's because you are a young adult, you're a female, and I think that's a perspective that we need to hear and one that we might not often hear.
Well, I appreciate that.
So
That's
let
kind.
me ask you the first question, and it's this.
Okay.
In general, how do you feel about slippery slope thinking in the church?
Starting off with a bang.
Yes.
I think sometimes I find it interesting that we're still talking about the slippery slope, that we should almost be thinking about other things that's more forward thinking. I feel like slippery slope, that topic kind of holds us back a little bit.
Okay.
So that's like my first reaction is, are we still talking about this? I thought we've kind of moved on. But anyways, so when it comes to slippery slope, I feel like some churches have made a habit of rejecting new ideas or fresh thinking based on this mentality.
So I don't want to put words in your mouth, but are you saying that you think some church leaders tend to default to this argument? They just out of hand reject new ideas, fresh thinking,
Yes.
based on this argument without
Yes.
giving those new ideas much consideration.
Well, sometimes. I mean, I
Okay.
can't say that they do that, but I feel like it's just become a habit. And I feel like slippery slope is a way to keep churches comfortable, keep us comfortable to where we're not rocking the boat and we're not advancing. It's just a way to kind of keep things.
Okay. Well, I appreciate your perspective.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I have already expressed myself in a number of posts on this, but this is one of my concerns, is that slippery slope thinking stifles the growth and the health of the church.
I agree.
So I tend to agree with you that it's too easy for us to dismiss new ideas and fresh thinking. Ideas and fresh thinking that might advance the church. It's too easy for us to just default to this idea that, well, we don't know what it'll lead to, so we better not try it.
Right.
All right. So here's question number 2.
Okay.
Should church leaders consider the possible unintended consequences of a decision they might make?
Well, yeah. They should consider that.
Yeah.
I think that's being a leader. I mean, you need to think about the actions and the possible consequences that could go. I mean, I think that's wise to do.
So you're saying they should consider what it might lead to?
Well, they should. Yes.
I agree with you. I think it would be unwise to make a decision without
Right.
considering what it might lead to.
Right.
I think what we're pleading for here, though, is the idea that we should not reject certain ideas or certain fresh thinking purely on the basis of what it might lead to. We want to encourage church leaders to consider
Right.
the consequences of a decision, but to also be wary of making a decision purely on the basis of slippery slope.
Yes. Okay, question number 3. Are you ready?
Lay it on me.
This one's for you. I want you to imagine a scenario to where maybe you're talking to a church leader about a new idea, and this is their response. We don't want to rock the boat. If we approve of this action, certain members might decide to leave. In this church, we value peace and unity. So how would you respond to a church leader who uses that rationale about a new action, one that's God approved, that has the potential to really grow the church?
Okay, there's nothing scripturally wrong with the idea,
No.
and it might help the church to grow.
Yes.
But because we're concerned about unity, we don't approve it.
Correct.
Okay. All right.
How would you respond
Well,
to that?
I think the first thing I would say is we should value unity and peace. We should
Okay.
place high priorities on those things because
Right.
Scripture places high value on unity and peace.
Right.
I think the second thing I might say, though, is are we concerned that some people might leave if we don't approve the new idea? I mean, we should be concerned about unity, but sometimes I wonder if it's all a matter of which people we are willing to lose.
Wow.
I mean, we make a decision based upon, well, we could lose these people. On the other hand, if we don't make this decision, we could lose those people. So we ought to value unity. But on the other hand, we ought to realize that we might lose some people no matter what we decide to do. What do you think about that response?
Well, I don't like it.
Okay.
To be truthful, I don't like that response at all. I think there are times in the church where we need to rock the boat a little bit because we're getting too comfortable. We're just idling. We're kind of inward and selfish. And I think there are times where we need to rock the boat. And to me, Dad, there are greater things at stake that we should be worrying about and trying to pursue to better the health of a church and to grow a church than worrying about maybe a small group of people that are going to leave over something that they don't like.
Well, that's a good point.
Because to me, that just becomes preference.
Okay. All right. Well, I appreciate your comments. Well, I want to add one more thing here is that, of course, you know me, I'm an idealist. I wish we could make decisions based on what is right
Yes.
and on what will help the church to grow.
Yes.
And I wish we were not so concerned about who might leave if we
Yes.
decide to do this. On the other hand, I know we ought to be concerned about who might leave because we ought to be concerned about unity. But I think what you said is true.
Right.
Is that there might be greater things at stake here than losing a few malcontents.
Yes.
Okay.
Definitely.
We better go to the next question real fast.
Okay.
Here's the fourth and final question.
Okay.
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. What suggestions would you have for church leaders who don't want to be restricted by slippery slope thinking, but who also value peace and unity?
That's a good question. I think one of the first things that comes to mind is this is where I would say church leaders, you really need to step up and lead, especially through communication. If you decide to take on a new idea and try and grow the church in a new way, I mean, communicate that as clearly as possible. Explain the decision. Allow for questions. Allow for conversation.
Good.
Communicate it very clearly.
Good.
Another thing that comes to mind too is instead of just dismissing a new idea because it could lead to this, maybe just ask yourself, does this line up with the vision of our church? Does this line up with our mission?
Mm-hmm.
I think that maybe sometimes we tend to use a slippery slope mentality to shut down new ideas because we're actually not very clear on our vision and mission.
All right.
You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
That may come from just confusion. But if we have a clear vision, a clear mission, I think saying yes to some of that may come more easily, and we will just automatically give it more thought.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, they certainly ought to ask if a new idea squares with Scripture.
Well, of course.
Of
yes.
course. But I like your question. Does this square up with the vision that we have for this church body?
Mm-hmm.
That's good.
What about you?
Well, I like those ideas. I think I would throw in one more, and that is to lay out clear boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it would be good for church leaders to say, okay, we have thought this through. We think this new idea will help the church to grow and will help people to grow spiritually.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to approve this action. We're going to allow it. But we're not going to allow X. Lay out clear boundaries. And if I were to use my illustration, I might say, okay, we think it's okay for the preacher to preach without a coat and tie. But we're not going to support him preaching in flip-flops and shorts. So, see, communicate again.
Right.
But communicate the boundaries.
Right.
This is what we're going to allow. This is what we're going to approve. But if some of you think it might lead to the approval of something else down the line, no, we're going to tell you up front, we're not going there. We're not going to go there.
I like that.
Okay.
Clear boundaries. That's
Clear
good-
boundaries.
good
Okay.
advice.
Well, folks, you've heard what a young adult female has thought about slippery slope argument, and you've already heard what I think about it. We'd like to hear what you think about it.
Chime in.
Yes, please give us your thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
We'd like to hear that.
Definitely.
And thank you very much for taking the time to consider these ideas with us. We appreciate it.